Recently, I started my car and all the warning lights came on for a few seconds as normal, but this light stayed on, which was my battery/charge fault indicator. Looking at a service manual for Dodge Avenger showed that model years 2010 and newer have a fusible link that goes between this positive jumper cable connection point on the driver's side strut tower and the output charging port of the alternator. My first guess was that this fusible link had blown or had gone open. So I have 2 voltmeters. I connected one at this alternator output port and the other one at this jumper cable connection point. With this setup and with the car engine running, I would expect to see a voltage at the output charging port of the alternator of approximately 14.4 volts and a voltage on the jumper cable positive connection point to be approximately 12 volts. So however, if the voltages are the same, then that means my fusible link is good and the alternator's bad, or the control circuit going to the alternator's bad. I set up 2 voltmeters. One of them was to measure the output voltage coming from the output post of the alternator. There's that positive connection right there from the voltmeter to the alternator output post. And then here is the negative of that voltmeter connected to chassis metal. The other voltmeter was connected to the plus and minus jumper points on the driver's side strut tower. The green voltmeter is monitoring the output charging voltage of the alternator. The blue voltmeter is monitoring the voltage over the jumper points on the driver's side strut tower. They should read the same voltage. So both of them are reading 12.54 volts and the car engine is off with this measurement. Next, I'm going to crank up the engine and see what the voltages are. So the blue voltmeter is reading 12.06 volts, 12.08, 12.04. The green voltmeter is reading 12.06 volts. That's a negligible millivolt difference. So the alternator is not producing any charging voltage. It's either due to a bad alternator or the field control signal that comes from the powertrain control module that turns the alternator on and off is not working, but I don't have a way to test that. Here I'm effectively disconnecting the negative terminal of the battery from the chassis metal of the car. There's a little plastic safety loop on the side of the connector, which when used can help prevent accidental reconnection of ground. I use this serpentine belt tool kit to remove and install my serpentine belt. It works great. It's got a really long reach and the head is really skinny, so it can reach down in very tight places, which was very necessary for this car. Here I'm using the serpentine belt tool and I'm using it to remove tension from the serpentine belt and slip the belt over the power steering pulley and remove it. Here I'm removing the overflow tank hose, making sure to keep the hose high enough so fluid doesn't flow out. I'm just stowing it off to the side here in this little hole. Here I'm removing the overflow tank and setting it to the side. It gives me a little more working space. To prevent making any messes, I had to be aware that there was an overflow pipe out of the overflow tank, and coolant can slosh or pour out of this pipe. Also, the rubber hose into the overflow tank needs to be kept above the liquid level in the tank. And also there's an alignment peg on the bottom of the tank that can make the tank even more unlevel than it's seen here in the photo. Here I'm removing the left-hand bolt of the access shield. This trim panel tool removal kit comes in this fabric zippered pouch. It's rather large. I'm going to be using this short clip release tool shortly. I did use these pliers to remove some plastic rivets also, but I didn't show that in the video, but I wore safety glasses with these because they are very powerful and can cause the head of the plastic rivet to pop off and ricochet. Now I'm removing the plastic rivets or push pins from the inner fender liner. And now I'm removing these small bolts at the edge of the fender. And now the fender liner easily slides out. The location of the 6 plastic rivets that hold the plastic inner fender liner in place are seen in this photo. Now I'm removing the right-hand bolt of the access shield. Here I'm removing the alternator field control and sense connector. It's got a cantilever that has to be depressed to remove the connector. Here I'm removing the plastic insulator cap from the alternator output post. It's got 2 cantilevers that have to be depressed, one on either side, and then it can be removed. Lastly, I'm loosening and removing the hex nut on the alternator output post, and then I'm removing the ring connector and setting it aside. This is a close-up of the electrical connector on the compressor. There's a cantilever on the bottom of the connector that has to be depressed, and then the connector can be wiggled off of the compressor. Here, this wire holder clip is being removed from this refrigerant line. I bundled the alternator wires and the compressor wires in a small plastic bag and then closed that with a rubber band. Then I secured that bag out of the way to this engine mount pulley. There are 3 bolts that hold the compressor to the engine. They must be removed. There are 2 bolts on the pulley side, an upper and a lower, and there's an additional bolt on the opposite end of the compressor. Here I'm loosening the pulley side upper bolt. Now I'm loosening the pulley side lower bolt. Now I'm loosening the bolt on the opposite end of the compressor. And I'm using this motorized ratchet to spin this bolt out. There's the bolt. Now I'm spinning out the pulley side lower bolt, going underneath to take it out. Now I'm spinning out the pulley side upper bolt. And there it is. Now the compressor is unbolted from the engine. And I bungee corded the compressor in place to keep any tension off the refrigerant lines. Here I'm loosening the upper alternator bolt. Here I'm taking out the lower idler pulley. This has to be removed to give access to the lower alternator mounting bolt. Here I'm loosening the lower alternator mounting bolt. I'm breaking it free here. Here I'm using a smaller ratchet to continue spinning that alternator mounting bolt out. Now the opposite end of that alternator mounting bolt has what I'll call an L nut on it. I've got my other hand on that L nut to make sure it's not lost when I'm spinning out the mount bolt. I'm continuing to spin out the mount bolt here while holding onto that L nut with the other hand. Okay, that bolt is completely loose. Seen here is the padded dolly rolled into place so that the old alternator will have a landing spot. Here I'm pushing the old alternator out through this opening. I think it's clear that the air conditioning compressor is very much in the way here. I did take the old alternator to the auto parts store and had them put it on their test bench. They tested it and confirmed indeed that the alternator was bad. I was given this slip as part of the alternator test. Here is the replacement alternator. It looks to be complete. It also includes the alternator decoupler pulley, which is an item priced by itself as approximately $45 and up. The warranty is printed on the receipt. I was told that it is lifetime as long as I own the car, and I have my receipt. Here I'm comparing the old versus the new alternator side by side just to make sure that I've got the right part. Here I've wrapped 2 bungee cords around the alternator and I've secured them in place with tie wraps. I also cut off the excess tie wrap ends. Okay, here I'm using the yellow bungee cords to pull the new alternator up through the wheel well into the engine compartment. As you can see, it's getting stuck on those orange bungee cords and the AC compressor, which is not visible in the shot. So I'm removing the orange bungee cords and the compressor is just hanging there. It's not visible, but it's just hanging. Okay, now I was able to push the alternator through into the engine compartment. And that's it. Here I'm removing the bungee cord from the alternator. I'm cutting the tie wraps. I'm pulling those 2 bungee cords off from around the alternator. And this is the lower alternator mounting bolt. And on the back end, the far end there is the L nut. The bolt screws into that L nut. I'm tightening it down, or running it in rather. This is the lower alternator mount. It's located just above the AC compressor. Here's a side view showing again the lower alternator mount and the upper alternator mount. So now I'm rotating the alternator around and I'm setting it in that lower alternator mount. And first I was trying to just hold the alternator in place with the bungee cord, but it turns out I didn't even need to do that. I'm rotating the alternator up and I'm putting in the upper mounting bolt. I'm going to run in that upper mounting bolt. Okay, now I'm going to use this motorized tool to just run it in. I'm torquing down the upper alternator mounting bolt with a click style torque wrench. Here I'm using a ratcheting click style torque wrench to run in the lower alternator mounting bolt. Now I'm torquing the bolt. The torque wrench I used has a 3/8 inch flex head and it has a 20 to 100 foot-pound range. Here's the wrench. To adjust it, this cover is opened on the side. Adjust the little knob for anywhere from 20 to 100 foot-pounds of torque. Close the cover. That's it. The head is not reversible. It works on clockwise fasteners only. Comes with a nice clamshell case. Reinstall and torque the lower idler pulley. It's clockwise to tighten. The compressor has to be bolted back to the engine. There are 3 mounting bolts. There's 2 on the pulley side, and then there's a third one on the opposite end of the opposite end from the pulley. I didn't get all of this on video. Here I am putting in one of the bolts. I do remember that I got into two of the bolts, and then I couldn't get the third bolt in, so I had to take them out and start all over again. There's precision mounting surfaces on the back between the compressor and the mount that it bolts to, so I had to be careful not to damage the mounts. Once I got the 3 compressor bolts in, I did torque them down. I bought and installed the new serpentine belt seen here because the car is over 8 years old and over 100,000 miles. This is a sketch of the serpentine belt routing, starting at the top and going counterclockwise. 1 is the power steering pump pulley, 2 is the upper idler pulley, 3 is the belt tensioner, 4 is the water pump, 5 is the crankshaft, 6 is the AC compressor, 7 is the lower idler pulley, and 8 is the alternator pulley. At this point, I reinstalled the serpentine belt using the serpentine belt tool to back off the tension on the belt tensioner arm. And I don't remember if I put the belt over the power steering pump pulley or the engine crankshaft pulley. I think it was one of those two. It did take me several attempts. It was not easy, and yeah, I did have success eventually. When it came to the alternator stud terminal nut, I used the one on the left, which was the original one that came with the car, versus the one on the right that came with the new alternator. Reinstall the alternator electrical connections. Don't forget to reattach the plastic insulator boot on the output terminal of the alternator. At this point, I reinstalled this captive clip on the compressor refrigerant line and also the electrical connector to the compressor. So when it came time to reinstall the overflow tank, I had to be aware of this little alignment peg on the bottom of the tank, which fits in this hole right here. So I set the tank in place, put in the fastener, ran it down, torqued it, repeat for the other fastener, and reattach the overflow hose. Here I'm reinstalling the splash shield, putting in the left bolt. Now putting in the right bolt, the view is obscured by that air conditioning accumulator tank. Snug it down and snug that other one down. Here I'm reinstalling the plastic inner fender liner, putting in the plastic rivets or push pins. There's 6 of them. Now I'm putting in these 3 small bolts along the fender perimeter, snugging them down. The other end of this cable connects to the negative terminal of the battery. So by reconnecting this end of the cable to the car's chassis, I'm reconnecting the negative terminal of the battery back to the car. Okay, I've got this voltmeter / battery tester connected to the jumper posts on the driver's side strut tower. I'm going to crank the car and see if this new alternator is working. All right, voltage is reading 14.14, 14.4, 14.38, 14.38 volts. Yeah, it's working. All right, I'm done. If you found this video helpful or entertaining, or you just would like to see more content like this, please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for watching.